The Epstein files are continuing to cause controversy, and according to newly released emails, Sarah Ferguson visited paedophile Jeffrey Epstein 5 days after his release from prison for child sex crimes and took her adult daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, then aged 19 and 20.
She gave them everything, and they just destroyed her. After years of standing by their mother through scandal after scandal, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie have finally broken their silence on Sarah Ferguson. And what they said has sent shockwaves through the entire royal family. Nobody saw this coming, not the palace, not the public, not even Sarah herself.
And unless their mother told them, is it really going to be on the radar of a 19 and a 20-year-old girls? They're probably just like Mum just said, we're off to go and get another freebie, which we know she loves.
Because the two people she sacrificed everything for, the two people she protected at all costs, just said the one thing that changes absolutely everything. And once you hear it, you will never look at this family the same way again. There are moments in public life when the weight of years of accusations, legal battles, and quiet deals behind closed doors finally becomes too much to carry. For Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, that moment appears to have arrived. According to multiple reports, the prince has been in contact with federal investigators in the United States, allegedly providing information related to the late Jeffrey Epstein and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell. It is a development that many people who have been following this story closely did not expect to happen, at least not willingly, and certainly not without a significant amount of pressure pushing him in that direction. To understand why this matters, you first have to appreciate just how long Prince Andrew managed to keep himself at arm's length from the full consequences of his association with Epstein. For years, he denied the most serious allegations against him. He gave interviews in which he appeared confident, almost unbothered. He used the protection of his royal status and the considerable resources available to him to navigate the legal and reputational challenges that kept piling up. But according to those familiar with the situation, the walls have been closing in for some time now, and what we are seeing today may be the result of a man who has finally run out of room to maneuver. Reports suggest that Prince Andrew was not simply an occasional guest in Epstein's world. He was, according to various sources and allegations that have been documented over the years, a regular presence. He was on the private jets, he was at the properties, he was at the island in the Caribbean that Epstein owned and that has since become one of the most talked about locations in this entire scandal. According to some accounts, he was present during encounters that go far beyond what anyone would describe as innocent socializing. And, perhaps most significantly, there are claims that recordings exist. Tapes, allegedly, that capture events from that period. The existence of such material, if confirmed, would represent an enormous problem for Prince Andrew, and it may well be one of the key reasons why cooperation with investigators has suddenly become a more attractive option than continued silence. The royal family's position in all of this deserves some attention as well. The institution has, over the past several years, made a series of moves that signal a clear desire to separate itself from Prince Andrew and the controversy surrounding him. He was relieved of his royal duties. He was asked to step back from public engagements. His military titles and royal patronages were returned to the crown. These were not small gestures. Stripping a senior member of the royal family of his public role is an extraordinary step, and it sent a message that the palace was not willing to absorb the damage that his continued presence in official life was causing. But beyond the public-facing decisions, there are reports that the pressure applied to Prince Andrew has been even more direct. According to sources quoted in various media outlets, he was effectively given an ultimatum: cooperate with the investigation, or face the full consequences of having the royal family's financial and institutional support withdrawn entirely. For most people, that might sound like an abstract threat. For Prince Andrew, it is anything but abstract. Unlike many other members of the royal family, he does not have a clear or established source of independent income. He is not a working royal who receives funding for carrying out official duties. His lifestyle, which by any measure is an expensive one, has long depended on the support structures that come with being part of the royal household. Royal Lodge, the property in Windsor Great Park where Prince Andrew has been living, is a grace and favour residence. It is not something he owns outright. The arrangement that allows him to live there is tied to his relationship with the Crown, and that relationship has been getting progressively more strained. Questions have also been raised by members of Parliament about the terms of the lease on the property and about how the Prince funds his day-to-day life. These are not comfortable questions to have asked publicly, and they add to the broader sense that his position is becoming increasingly precarious. So the question that has been on a lot of people's minds is a fairly simple one. Is Prince Andrew cooperating because he genuinely wants to help bring clarity to one of the most troubling cases of abuse and exploitation in recent memory? Or is this a calculated decision made by someone who looked at his options and concluded that working with investigators was the least damaging path available to him? The two possibilities are not mutually exclusive, of course. People can do the right thing for the wrong reasons, and the outcome can still be meaningful. But the timing and the context matter, and they do raise legitimate questions about his motivations. Those who have followed this case for a long time have pointed out that Andrew had opportunities to come forward much earlier. Virginia Giuffre, the woman whose allegations against him have been the most prominent and well documented, first spoke publicly about her experiences well over a decade ago. The FBI had been building its case against Epstein for years before his arrest in 2019. There were moments along the way when Andrew could have chosen transparency over denial. He did not take those moments. Instead, he held his ground, maintained his denials, and gave every impression that he believed he could ride out the storm. What changed is not hard to identify, even if the precise sequence of private conversations and legal advice that led to his current position remains unclear. Epstein died in a federal detention facility in August 2019, officially ruled a suicide, though that conclusion has been disputed by many. Maxwell was arrested in 2020, tried, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The network of protection and mutual silence that Epstein had built over decades began to unravel. Documents were unsealed. Names appeared in court filings. The full picture, while still not entirely visible to the public, became significantly clearer. And Prince Andrew, who had positioned himself as someone who barely knew what was going on, found himself increasingly exposed. Whether his cooperation with federal investigators turns out to be genuine or strategic, complete or carefully limited, remains to be seen. What is clear is that this is not a story that is going away. The questions surrounding Prince Andrew, his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and what he witnessed or participated in during those years are not going to be resolved by a single statement or a carefully managed legal settlement. The investigation continues, the pressure continues. And for a man who once walked the corridors of one of the most powerful institutions in the world, the ground beneath his feet has never felt less stable. There are books that get published, receive a few reviews, and then quietly disappear from public conversation. And then there are books that land like a thunderclap, that shift the way an entire story is understood, and that make it impossible for certain people to continue presenting a version of events that no longer holds up. Virginia Giuffre's memoir falls firmly into the second category. When it was published, it did not simply add another layer to an already complicated story. It fundamentally changed the terms of the conversation around Prince Andrew, around the royal family, and around the full scale of what Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had been doing for years. The memoir, titled Nobody's Girl, is Virginia Giuffre's account of her own life, told in her own words. It covers her background, the circumstances that made her vulnerable, and the way she was drawn into Epstein's circle at a young age. It is not an easy read by any account. The details she shares are deeply troubling, and they paint a picture of a network of powerful and wealthy men who believed, with good reason based on how long it all continued, that they were untouchable. What made the book so significant in the context of Prince Andrew specifically was the clarity and the specificity with which Giuffre described her encounters with him. This was not vague recollection or uncertain memory. She named him directly, described the circumstances in detail, and provided an account that left very little room for the kind of ambiguity that lawyers tend to rely on when building a defense. According to the memoir, Giuffre described at least 3 separate encounters with Prince Andrew in which she was made to perform sexual acts with him. She described the settings, the people who were present, and the broader context in which these encounters took place. One of the incidents she detailed involved Epstein and a group of young girls, a description that, if accurate, places the events in a category of abuse that goes well beyond what most people would consider a private indiscretion or a lapse in judgment. These were not situations that could be explained away as a misunderstanding or a matter of competing interpretations. Giuffre was clear about what happened, clear about who was involved, and clear about the power dynamics that made resistance or refusal effectively impossible. The response from Prince Andrew's side to Giuffre's allegations over the years has been consistent, if not particularly convincing. He has denied the core allegations. He gave a now infamous interview to the BBC in 2019, which he attempted to address the claims directly, and that interview, widely regarded as one of the most disastrous pieces of crisis communication in recent royal history, did more damage than it repaired. He offered explanations that the public found difficult to accept, including a claim that a medical condition meant he was physically incapable of sweating, which Giuffre had mentioned as a detail she remembered from one of their encounters. He also claimed, with an air of certainty that struck many observers as odd, that he had absolutely no memory of ever meeting her, despite a photograph existing that showed the two of them together, with Maxwell also visible in the background. The photograph itself became one of the central pieces of evidence in the broader public debate about Andrew's credibility. It is a simple image, taken at what appears to be a social gathering, and it shows a young Virginia Giuffre standing next to Prince Andrew, who has his arm around her. While Ghislaine Maxwell smiles in the background, Andrew and his team initially suggested the photograph might have been manipulated, or that its authenticity could not be verified. Those arguments did not gain much traction, and the image remains one of the most frequently referenced pieces of visual evidence in this entire story. What the memoir did, beyond adding specific details to the allegations, was give the public a fuller understanding of how the Epstein and Maxwell operation actually worked. Giuffre described a system in which young women and girls were recruited, often under false pretenses, brought into close proximity with wealthy and powerful men, and then manipulated, coerced, or outright forced into performing sexual acts. Maxwell, according to Giuffre and numerous other accounts, played a central role in this process. She was not a passive bystander. She was an active participant in the recruitment, the grooming, and the abuse. And the men who benefited from this system, Prince Andrew among them, according to Giuffre's account, were able to do so because the entire structure was built around protecting them. The impact of the memoir on the royal family was immediate and significant. The palace had already been dealing with the fallout from Andrew's BBC interview and from the ongoing legal proceedings in the United States, but the publication of Giuffre's book brought a new level of public attention and scrutiny. It was no longer possible to treat this as a matter that was being handled through legal channels, away from public view. The details were out in the open, written down, published, and read by an enormous number of people. The royal family, which has always placed a great deal of importance on the management of its public image, found itself in a position that it could not easily manage or contain. It is worth taking a moment to consider what it means for an institution like the British royal family to have a senior member named in a memoir of this kind. The monarchy's authority and relevance depend, to a very significant degree, on public trust and on the perception that those who hold royal titles are, if not morally superior, then at least fundamentally respectable. A detailed, first-person account of the kind Virginia Giuffre provided does not just damage one individual's reputation. It raises questions about the culture and the environment that allowed someone in Andrew's position to behave in the way that is alleged, and to do so for years without meaningful consequences. Giuffre herself was not a faceless accuser. She had been speaking publicly about her experiences for years before the memoir was published, and she had pursued legal action in the United States that eventually resulted in a settlement with Prince Andrew in 2022. The terms of that settlement were not disclosed publicly, but the fact that Andrew chose to settle rather than contest the case in court was noted widely as a significant development. Settlements do not constitute an admission of guilt in a legal sense, and Andrew's representatives were careful to emphasize that point. But for many people following the story, a man who firmly believed in his own innocence and had the resources to mount a full legal defense, choosing instead to pay an undisclosed sum to make the case go away, was not an easy thing to interpret charitably. The memoir landed at a moment when public patience with the kind of institutional protection that wealthy and powerful men have historically enjoyed was already running thin. The broader cultural conversation around abuse, accountability, and the way that money and status can insulate people from consequences had been shifting for years, accelerated in part by the wave of public reckonings that had taken place in various industries and institutions. Virginia Giuffre's account, told plainly and without apparent desire to sensationalize, fitted into that broader moment in a way that made it all the more powerful. She was not asking for sympathy or performing outrage. She was simply describing what had happened to her, naming the people involved, and letting the facts speak for themselves. For Prince Andrew, the publication of the memoir represented a point of no return. Whatever narrative he had been attempting to maintain, whatever hope remained that the story might eventually lose momentum and fade, the memoir made that outcome significantly less likely. The details were too specific, the account too consistent with what other victims and witnesses had described, and the public interest too intense for the story to simply be managed into silence. The book did not just trend on social media or generate headlines for a few days. It became a reference point, a document that people returned to as new developments emerged, and a reminder that behind all the legal maneuvering and public relations strategies, there were real people whose lives had been profoundly damaged. There is a particular kind of denial that is not simply the act of saying something did not happen. It is a sustained, deliberate, years-long effort to construct and maintain an alternative version of events in the face of mounting evidence, increasing legal pressure, and the testimony of people who were directly affected. Prince Andrew's response to the allegations surrounding his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein has, over the course of more than a decade, looked very much like that kind of denial. And tracing the timeline of how he responded, how the evidence accumulated, and how his position gradually became untenable, tells you a great deal about both the man and the system that enabled him for so long. Virginia Giuffre first came forward publicly with her allegations against Prince Andrew in 2014. At that point, Epstein had already served a prison sentence in Florida following a 2008 conviction on charges of soliciting prostitution, a plea deal that was widely criticized at the time for being extraordinarily lenient given what prosecutors reportedly knew about the full extent of his activities. Despite that conviction, Epstein had largely resumed his life among the wealthy and well-connected, and Andrew had continued to associate with him. When Giuffre's allegations emerged and began attracting media attention, Andrew's response was one of dismissal. His representatives issued denials. The claims were described as untrue. There was no indication that the prince intended to engage seriously with what was being alleged, or to offer any meaningful account of his relationship with Epstein beyond what he had already publicly acknowledged. For the next several years, the story continued to develop in the background. Journalists investigated, lawyers filed motions, court documents were sealed and contested. But publicly, Prince Andrew maintained his position, and the machinery of royal reputation management continued to work in his favour. That changed in 2019, and it changed decisively. In July of that year, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested by federal authorities in New York and charged with sex trafficking of minors. The arrest reignited intense public and media interest in everyone who had been close to him, and Prince Andrew was among the most prominent names in that conversation. Within weeks, Andrew gave his now widely discussed interview to the BBC, broadcast in November 2019, in which he attempted to address the allegations directly and explain the nature of his relationship with Epstein. The interview achieved the opposite of what was presumably intended. Rather than settling the questions surrounding his conduct, it generated an enormous amount of new scrutiny and considerable public skepticism. Among the claims Andrew made during that interview was that he had no recollection of ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, despite the existence of a photograph showing the two of them together at a gathering that also included Ghislaine Maxwell. He suggested that on the specific night Giuffre claimed one of their encounters took place, he had been at a Pizza Express restaurant in Woking with his daughter, Princess Beatrice, for a birthday party, and that he remembered this with unusual clarity. He also offered the explanation mentioned earlier in relation to Giuffre's memoir that a medical condition prevented him from sweating, which he put forward as a reason to doubt her account of him perspiring during one of the alleged encounters. The public reaction to these explanations was largely one of disbelief, and the interview is now regularly cited as an example of how not to handle a reputational crisis. Shortly after the interview aired, Andrew announced that he was stepping back from royal duties. The decision came after a rapid deterioration in his public standing, and after several of the charities and organisations he was associated with began distancing themselves from him. He framed the decision as being in the best interests of the royal family. What followed was a gradual but unmistakable process of institutional separation, with the palace making a series of moves designed to reduce any official connection between the crown and the controversy surrounding him. Meanwhile, in the United States, the legal and investigative processes continued. Epstein died in August 2019 inches. A federal detention facility in New York officially ruled a suicide, though the circumstances of his death have been a subject of significant public debate and suspicion. His death removed him as a potential witness and source of information, but it did not stop the investigation. Ghislaine Maxwell, who had gone into hiding following Epstein's arrest, was located and arrested in July 2020. She was tried on charges related to the sex trafficking of minors and convicted in December 2021, subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. Maxwell's conviction was a significant moment because it confirmed, in a legal and judicial sense, that the operation she and Epstein had run was exactly what victims and investigators had been saying it was for years. For Prince Andrew, Maxwell's conviction effectively removed what many observers described as a significant part of his protective layer. Both of the people most central to the network he had been part of were now either dead or imprisoned. The sealed documents, the court filings, and the testimony that had been accumulating were increasingly available to scrutiny. And in this context, Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit against Andrew in the United States, filed in August 2021, represented a direct and unavoidable legal challenge that he could not simply dismiss or delay indefinitely. The lawsuit alleged that Andrew had sexually abused Giuffre when she was 17 years old, and it sought damages under New York law. Andrew's legal team mounted a series of procedural challenges, in an attempt to have the case dismissed before it reached trial. Those efforts were ultimately unsuccessful, and in January 2022, a federal judge ruled that the lawsuit could proceed. At that point, the prospect of Andrew being required to give testimony under oath, to answer questions in a formal legal setting about his relationship with Epstein and the specific allegations Giuffre had made, became very real. It was in this context that Andrew reached a settlement with Giuffre in February 2022. The financial terms were not publicly disclosed, but reports indicated that the sum involved was substantial, with some accounts suggesting it ran into the millions. As part of the settlement, Andrew did not admit any wrongdoing. His statement at the time expressed regret for his association with Epstein and acknowledged Giuffre's experiences as a trafficking victim, but stopped short of accepting any personal responsibility for what she had alleged. Critics noted that the language of the statement appeared to have been carefully constructed to express a degree of sympathy without constituting any kind of admission. The settlement resolved the civil case, but did nothing to address the broader questions about Andrew's conduct or the interest that law enforcement agencies had expressed in speaking with him. Reports in the years following the settlement indicated that American investigators had repeatedly sought to interview Andrew as part of their wider investigation into Epstein's network and the people connected to it. Those requests were, according to various reports, not met with the kind of direct and substantive cooperation that investigators were looking for. Andrew's legal team engaged with the process, but in a manner that many observers described as careful and limited, rather than open and forthcoming. What made this posture increasingly difficult to sustain was the sheer volume of evidence that had accumulated and continued to emerge about the depth of Andrew's involvement in Epstein's world. It was not simply a matter of having attended a few social events where Epstein happened to be present. Andrew himself acknowledged, in the BBC interview and in other contexts, that he had travelled on Epstein's private aircraft, stayed at his home in Palm Beach, visited his property in New York, and spent time on his private island in the Caribbean. He had stayed at Ghislaine Maxwell's home in London. He had been hosted by Epstein on multiple occasions across multiple countries over a period of many years. Among the pieces of evidence that received particular attention was a photograph from 2006 showing Andrew alongside Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell at a party held to celebrate his daughter, Princess Beatrice's 18th birthday. The gathering took place at Royal Lodge, Andrew's private residence within the grounds of Windsor Castle. What made this photograph especially significant was the timing. It was taken approximately 2 months after an arrest warrant had been issued for Epstein in the United States in connection with the sexual abuse of a minor in Florida. 8 days after the photograph was taken, Epstein was arrested by the FBI. Andrew's explanation for why he continued to socialize with Epstein despite the outstanding arrest warrant was that he was not aware of the legal situation in the United States at the time. That explanation was received with considerable skepticism by those following the story. Taken together, the timeline of denials, the failed BBC interview, the civil settlement, the photographs, the travel on Epstein's jet, the stays at his properties, and the years of association with both Epstein and Maxwell painted a picture that was increasingly difficult to reconcile with the idea of a man who had been an innocent bystander caught up in something he did not understand. The evidence did not point to someone who had been naive or poorly informed. It pointed to someone who had been deeply embedded in a social world that revolved around Epstein and Maxwell, and who had benefited from that world in ways that he has never fully or clearly explained. There comes a point in stories like this one where the consequences that have been building for years begin to arrive all at once, and the distance between a person's public position and their private reality collapses entirely. For Prince Andrew, that point appears to have been reached. What began as a reputational problem that could be managed through careful statements and legal maneuvering has transformed into something far more serious and far more difficult to contain. The losses have been institutional, financial, and personal, and the process is not yet over. The stripping of Prince Andrew's royal titles and military honours was not a single event, but a process that unfolded over time, with each step representing a further withdrawal of the status and protection that his position within the royal family had historically provided. In early 2022, following the failure of his legal team's attempts to have Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit dismissed, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Andrew would no longer use his Royal Highness styling in any official capacity. His military affiliations and royal patronages, which he had already been asked to return when he stepped back from public duties in 2019, were formally removed. The title of Duke of York, which he had held since 1986, when it was conferred upon him by his mother, Queen Elizabeth, remained technically his, but became increasingly hollow in practical terms. The decision to remove these honours was not taken lightly within the institution. The British royal family has historically been deeply reluctant to publicly discipline or strip titles from its members, partly out of a desire to protect the broader institution, and partly because of the personal and dynastic complications that such decisions inevitably create. The fact that the palace was willing to take these steps in Andrew's case reflected the severity of the situation and the extent to which his continued association with the Epstein scandal was judged to be damaging to the monarchy as a whole. The late Queen Elizabeth, by all accounts, found the situation deeply painful. Andrew was widely understood to be one of her favourite children, and the public unravelling of his reputation took place largely during the final years of her life. Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's former wife, was also affected by these developments. The two divorced in 1996, but maintained a notably close relationship, continuing to live together at Royal Lodge for many years and presenting a united front on various public occasions. As part of the broader repositioning of Andrew within the royal structure, it was confirmed that Ferguson would no longer be addressed as the Duchess of York, a title she had continued to use following the divorce. For a woman who had built a considerable portion of her public identity around her connection to the royal family, this represented a significant change in circumstances. The financial dimensions of Andrew's situation have attracted considerable scrutiny and deserve to be examined carefully. Unlike working members of the royal family who receive funding from the sovereign grant in exchange for carrying out official duties, Andrew has not held that status since stepping back from public life. His primary expenses, including the upkeep of Royal Lodge, a substantial property set within the grounds of Windsor Great Park, have been a subject of ongoing public interest and political debate. Members of Parliament have asked direct questions about the terms on which Andrew occupies the property, what he pays in rent, if anything, and how the arrangement is structured, given that he is no longer performing any public role on behalf of the Crown. These are not trivial questions. Royal Lodge is a grace and favour property, meaning its use is tied to the Crown's discretion, rather than being something Andrew owns or has an independent right to occupy indefinitely. Reports have indicated that Andrew pays a nominal rent that bears no relationship to the commercial value of a property of that size and in that location. The suggestion that a man who has been effectively removed from public royal life continues to enjoy the use of a significant royal residence at minimal cost has generated real political pressure, with calls from various quarters for the arrangement to be reviewed or terminated. Beyond the question of his residence, there is the broader issue of how Andrew funds his lifestyle. He does not have an obvious source of income. He does not work in a conventional sense, does not hold any corporate positions that are publicly known, and is no longer in receipt of royal funding for official duties. The civil settlement with Virginia Giuffre, while its exact terms were not disclosed, is understood to have been a substantial financial commitment. How Andrew met that obligation and how he continues to cover his living expenses are questions that have not been answered publicly in any satisfactory way. It is against this backdrop of institutional exclusion and financial vulnerability that the question of his cooperation with investigators takes on its fullest significance. A man in Andrew's position, with no independent income, no official role, no royal duties, and an increasingly uncertain relationship with the institution that has historically provided the framework for his entire existence, is not in a strong negotiating position. The leverage that others have over him is real and substantial. The suggestion that the royal family communicated to him, either directly or through intermediaries, that full cooperation with investigators was expected of him, is entirely consistent with the dynamics of his situation. Whether framed as an ultimatum or as strong advice, the message would have been clear. What has made the situation more complicated, and what has generated additional public skepticism about Andrew's intentions, is the pattern of behaviour that has emerged since his initial signals of willingness to cooperate. Rather than moving toward a position of full transparency and genuine engagement with the investigative process, Andrew has appeared to retreat. Statements issued on his behalf have continued to assert his innocence and deny the central allegations against him. His legal representatives have engaged with investigators in ways that have been described by those close to the process as carefully managed and limited rather than open and forthcoming. The impression created is of a man who is willing to appear cooperative without being genuinely cooperative, who understands that outright refusal carries consequences he cannot afford, but who is equally determined not to say anything that would directly incriminate him. This approach, if that is indeed what it represents, carries its own significant risks. Federal investigators are not easily managed or manipulated, and a strategy of partial engagement combined with continued denials is unlikely to produce the outcome Andrew might be hoping for. The people conducting these investigations are experienced professionals who have spent years building a detailed picture of Epstein's network and the individuals within it. They are not dependent on Andrew's voluntary account of events. They have documents, financial records, flight logs, testimony from other witnesses, and, if the reports about recordings are accurate, potentially a great deal more. The flight logs associated with Epstein's private aircraft became a significant point of public interest in the years following his arrest, as they provided documentary evidence of who had travelled on his planes and when. Andrew's name appeared in those logs on multiple occasions. Combined with records of his stays at Epstein's properties, and the photographic evidence placing him in Epstein's social circle across multiple countries and over many years, the documentary record of his involvement is already substantial. Whatever he chooses to say or not say to investigators, the factual foundation of the case does not rest entirely on his cooperation. The broader reckoning that Prince Andrew now faces is not simply legal or financial. It is a reckoning with the consequences of a life lived within a system of extraordinary privilege, a system that provided protection, resources, and insulation from accountability in ways that most people will never experience. That system has not disappeared entirely, but it has been significantly weakened in its ability to shield him. The courts, the investigators, the journalists, and the public have all played a role in dismantling the protective structures that once made it possible for someone in his position to navigate accusations of this seriousness without facing meaningful consequences. There is also the matter of what the full truth, if it ever emerges completely, would mean for institutions and individuals beyond Prince Andrew himself. The Epstein scandal has always been, at its core, a story about systems of power and the way those systems can be used to exploit the vulnerable while protecting the powerful. Prince Andrew is one name in a much larger story, and the questions surrounding his conduct connect to broader questions about accountability, about the limits of privilege, and about what it means for justice to be done in cases where the people involved have access to resources and protections that ordinary people do not. For now, Prince Andrew occupies an unusual and uncomfortable position. He is no longer a working royal, no longer a public figure in any meaningful sense, and no longer able to rely on the full weight of the institution that once defined him. He lives in a grace and favour home that may not remain available to him indefinitely, funded by means that have not been publicly explained, and facing an ongoing investigation that shows no signs of concluding quietly. The man who once carried out hundreds of official engagements a year, who represented the crown at home and abroad, and who moved through the world with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, is now waiting to see what investigators find, waiting to see what documents are unsealed, waiting, perhaps, to see whether the recordings that have been reported to exist ever become part of the public record. Whatever comes next, the story of Prince Andrew and his connection to Jeffrey Epstein is not finished, and the next chapter is unlikely to be any more comfortable for him than the ones that have already been written.